Welcome everyone to this afternoon's EJ cohort briefing for both progressive movement groups and philanthropic partners. My name is Bethany Mackey. I'm the executive director here at Progressive Multiplier. Violetta, Andrea, Lisa, Polly, and I are thrilled to welcome you into this conversation today, which has been 2 years in the making. I'd like to take a moment and recognize my teammates' work on behalf of the EJ cohort over the last 2 years, whether it's been working directly in supporting our grantee partners on their revenue generation projects or making sure our funder partners have been connected to the work that they're making possible, to lifting up the ongoing story of these groups and the work they do and the revenue they need to support it. I could not ask for 4 better people to stand shoulder to shoulder with in this work every day, and appreciate them being here today and always. We're here today because this is our truth. Progressive Multiplier was founded 4 years ago by Phil Radford with the thought leadership, collaboration, and support of movement leaders, many of whom are on the call today. I know I saw Guillermo and Jay Beckner and several folks who were part of that initial research already on our attendee list. But we're here because of this truth. Organized people coupled with organized money creates power in a democracy. Diversifying both the people and the type of money we organize creates exponentially more and more durable power. Our vision is that that power translates into a progressive movement with enough scale to achieve justice, realize democracy, and restore the environment. To achieve that vision, Progressive Multiplier helps movement groups start, strengthen, or scale individual giving and earned revenue programs to support building power. We do this by creating high leverage investment opportunities for institutional funders and donors to strengthen the independent financial position of movement groups. I want to pause to recognize both the incredible work that these groups and today's specific threat to their mission. So today, on this 10th anniversary of DACA, we have movement groups marching in DC demanding the permanent protection that dreamers deserve. Today, in the middle of Pride Month, movement groups are fighting a wave of state-based anti-LGBTQ legislation unlike we've seen in decades. And today, the entire movement is waiting for the Supreme Court to confirm that it is doing the unthinkable of rolling back the right to essential health care. But today, we're going to hear from 5 groups who've taken this journey of strengthening their independent revenue programs to build more power and scale. And each one of them demonstrates every day, to quote Danny, and the crew over at Power Shift, that climate justice for all means economic, reproductive, gender, racial, disability, queer, trans, housing, healing, land, migrant, and environmental justice. These groups' projects were possible because our funder partners invested in them as a way for these movement groups to build power. JPB awarded Progressive Multiplier the grant to start this cohort in March of 2020. We all remember that month, right? I remember emailing Phil and saying, I wasn't sure if traveling by plane to JPB's office in New York from here in Florida was safe because of this COVID outbreak thing. JPB has been with our team every step of these last 2 years while we navigated being a young funding intermediary during a pandemic. So a very special thank you to Anna Loiseau, who's our senior program officer at JPB, and she just defines exceptional partnership and sets quite the bar. Northlight has also been an early partner in this effort, awarding a grant that's allowing us to pilot participatory grant making and compensated peer mentoring with this cohort on the phone today. And we'll actually be issuing a call for letters of inquiry at the conclusion of today's discussion because of JPB's renewal and Northlight's additional support. So I'd love to ask Anastasia and Kate, could you please introduce yourselves and share why your foundations are supporting independent revenue generation as a means of building progressive power? Anastasia?
Hi, everyone. I'm Anastasia Standrick. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the program associate at the JPB Foundation, a pretty recent hire. I started in the spring of 2022, and I'm supporting Anna Loiseau, who has been spearheading this effort with the Progressive Multiplier and leads our environmental justice portfolio, and also Janice Hernandez, who leads our energy portfolio. And to give you a little bit of background into just how JPB got into this partnership, as Bethany mentioned, we provided funding for the inaugural environmental justice cohort in 2020. And from everything I've heard from Anna, and I've heard a lot about this work because it really stands out among the kind of movement work happening right now. Everyone's been really excited on the environment team. The diverse cohort of grantees is really impressive. And obviously the technical expertise and just the level of innovation that Progressive Multiplier brings has been inspiring to us all. And JPB and the environment team and JPB as a whole feels strongly about giving environmental and climate justice groups all the tools they need to live into the futures that they can design for themselves, the solutions that they lead themselves. However, we're also well aware of historic disinvestment and harm done to environmental and climate justice grassroots groups, and that disinvestment is longstanding and well documented. And not easily repaired, but Progressive Multiplier is and has been a really values aligned partner for us in this, and have helped guide us in how we can also participate in reversing this disinvestment trend in a systemic and with a long-term vision way. And that's not to say that there's much more we can do, because there is, especially as funders, but I'm personally really inspired, and I know the JPB team is, that the more grassroots leaders, organizations, communities have ownership and agency over their own visions and the budgets to back up and implement those visions, the better off we will all be in facing the intersecting injustices that will only continue to be multiplied because of the climate crisis. So thank you so much for all being here. I'm really honored to share the space with you all and learn more about the cohort members directly and y'all's experience. So I'll pass it on to Kate.
Thanks, Anastasia and Bethany. It's terrific to be here. I'm also really excited to hear from the grantee partners about their experiences. I'm Kate Sinding Daly. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the executive director of Northlight Foundation. I love this slide because JPB is one of our favorite partners in many different endeavors, and this is one of our favorite ones also. You know, I guess what I'll just to add to what Bethany laid out in terms of the mission, vision and approach, and what Anastasia said about why JPB supports the work. You know, I come at this, I'm a little more further along in my career, and I come at this, you know, with a lot of hats that I wear or have worn, you know, working in grant-seeking organizations, being on the boards of grant-seeking organizations of various different sizes and different capacities, including one environmental justice organization. And you know, I think what Progressive Multiplier does is just completely unique in terms of the capacity building and support that it brings to the progressive community broadly, and then specifically the EJ community, which is core to Northlight's own area of focus. And so, you know, we just know how incredibly valuable developing this set of skills is, and how in particular the peer mentoring and participatory elements of this bring so much more on top of what Bethany and the Progressive Multiplier team's expertise brings for grantee partners. So I'll leave it at that, and very eager to jump into the conversation.
Thank you both, Anastasia and Kate, so much for your ongoing support, and of course for being here today and helping us moderate. So let's get into it. I'm going to ask each of our grantee partners to introduce themselves and their organizations before we dive into the questions. Hoping to give Jameer and the US CAN crew about 5 more minutes to get here. We're texting furiously. So hopefully they will be here shortly. But Jessica, will you kick us off with introduction, both you and your organization?
Absolutely. And hi, everyone. Good afternoon from New Orleans, also known as Wobancha. My name is Jessica Dandridge, as it says. I'm Executive Director of the Water Collaborative of Greater New Orleans. And we help communities live and thrive with water. We do that through 3 ways: education, policy, and equity. And when I say live and thrive with water, we work on 2 specific issues. We work on green infrastructure and stormwater management, particularly in urban and suburban communities. And then we also work on water justice issues. So we work on water affordability, access, and quality, as well as environmental justice issues here in Southeast Louisiana and across the Gulf South. So thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Jess. Let us pass to Whitney.
Hello, my name is Whitney Kuklinski, she, her. I am currently occupying Cherokee and Shawnee land. I am the social media manager at Kentuckians for the Commonwealth, and we work on a range of projects from environmental justice to voter restoration. And we are additionally, we're a member-led organization as well.
Awesome, thanks, Whitney. Danny?
Thanks a bunch. My name is Danny Sigwalt. I'm Executive Director of Power Shift Network, which is a network of about 130 different organizations who are all working to mobilize the collective impact of young folks fighting for climate justice. I am currently in Fairfax, Virginia, which I learned, thanks to this prompt, is Monahawk land. And I use she, her pronouns.
It's Danny. And Mark?
Hello,
And Luca.
everybody. Yes, Mark and Luca. My name is Mark Chavez. I am the donor relations organizer for Climate Justice Alliance. I live on the Port Madison Reservation of the Suquamish tribe in Western Washington. And Climate Justice Alliance is a member-led alliance. We have 82 members across the United States and territories, and we just work to create a center of gravity within the climate justice movement to build the struggle and fight the bad and build the new. And I'll check there for now. And this is Luca Mayu. They're going to be with us for a few more minutes, and then they're going to go join Mama for another call downstairs.
Thanks, Mark. And Luca is an honorary Progressive Multiplier member because Mama is also a Progressive Multiplier grantee partner with Ultraviolet. So we are all about teaching the revenue generation to the next generation, very young here. So Luca is always welcome on calls. And the one member of our panel who is viciously stuck on a call is Jameer Fulmer. He will be joining us shortly from U.S. Climate Action Network. So he will jump on when he's able. All right, let's get into these questions. And audience members, unfortunately in the Zoom webinar format, you can't raise hands or jump in. So please weigh in the chat if you have questions. We have some time at the end for questions, but we can intersperse them throughout as well, depending on what feels right. So let's get into it. Jess, I'm going to throw to you first. Why did you want to experiment with growing your independent revenue generation program? And where does this work intersect with building power for you and Water Collaborative?
Yes, I'm so sorry about that, Bethany. Someone was calling me on my phone, so the question cut out a little bit, but I think I caught most of it. So I can just talk a little bit about the project and where we're coming from. So as I mentioned, we work on helping communities live and thrive with water. And we really wanted to, we already educate people on the issues here in Louisiana, why New Orleans floods, the history behind the water system here, the complexities, the relationship and the intersectionality regarding Indigenous land rights, as well as a relationship to the enslaved. And so, well, we did that for many years for free. And I realized that we needed to monetize that. Especially for me, I came in as a new executive director right before COVID-19. And I thought it was really important for us to have an independent revenue stream that wasn't dependent on incoming funds from grants or federal aid or anything like that, that would help us maintain our operations and our and the work that we do on a regular basis, especially providing free programs to our members as well as the larger community. We often do like lunch and learns and tours. We of green infrastructure sites. We do educational series. And we want to keep most of that free if we can. And so that was one of the reasons why we did this project. And so what the project is that what you want me to go to, Bethany? I'm sorry.
Yeah, why don't you kick it to Danny and let us know over at PowerShift, how did growing the independent revenue generation really fit into the work you were already doing and how you wanted to build power? And then we can get into experiments in our next round, because we're going to get our geek on.
Thanks, Bethany. So PowerShift Network, when I started, was actually still called Energy Action Coalition. It was an organization that had been founded by a bunch of then young millennials who came from wealth. And part of the trajectory of our organization, the melanation, as I like to say, over time is our organization has become staffed and our board has become filled by folks of color who have less access to wealth for various reasons. And obviously there are some exceptions, but our organization was essentially founded on family foundations that as the organization shifted, we no longer had access to that money. So it was really important for us to figure out how we could build new income streams and like renew or like build new connections with individual folks with wealth to be able to support the mission and vision of our organization as a part of our long-term sustainability vision, and also be able to do that in a way that was empowering and not just left us beholden to major donors, but really build in opportunities to offer like a reciprocal relationship with our funders, and build buy-in.
Awesome. Whitney, what about you? Where did independent rev gen fit for Kentuckians for the Commonwealth and what you were already doing? And where did it intersect with your power building strategy?
Sure. For us at KFTC, fundraising is an essential grassroots organizing tool, and grassroots donors. It's essential to our organizing because most Kentuckians won't ever go to Frankfurt with us to lobby legislators. They won't be able to attend a rally or other events. But when we get their support, a lot of times they can contribute some small amount. And then from there, we're able to plug them into other work that might suit them best.
Great. And Mark and Luca, what about you guys over at Climate Justice Alliance?
Yeah, I'd say, I mean, the most obvious answer is we just wanted to be able to make more money and to have it be unrestricted, right? Like not have anybody else determining what the use of that money was going to be for us, allowing ourselves to have complete determination over the capital that's flowing into our organization. On top of that, I'd say just like a couple of other things is like finding a way to kind of like set it and forget it when it comes to bringing capital into organizations is like a really great thing to do. So trying to figure out things we can do that move us in that direction a little bit more. And then the third reason would be, as a member-based alliance, we really are trying to take these learning opportunities so that we can share them with our members and help our members to grow their revenue base, grow their supporter base, and things like that. And so we see these opportunities not just as a way for us to build, but also to help kind of build the movement on a larger scale and help grassroots groups all around the country kind of gain more access to this type of information.
Perfect. Thanks, Mark. And Jameer, have you joined us?
I sure have.
Hello, my friend. So everyone, this is Jameer Fulmer from USCAN. Jameer, can I ask you to catch up a little bit, introduce yourself and USCAN's work, and tell us why did you want to experiment with independent revenue generation as part of power building?
Yeah. So hi all, my name is Jameer Fulmer, he, him, his. I'm with USCAN. And we are a network of 190 plus organizations. Some of the panelists are members of USCAN as well. And one of the things that makes us different as an organization or as a network is we have members that help pay dues and stuff, but we don't really have as strong of a connection to like the connection to the donor. And so finding a new rev gen source was really essential to us, bridging the gap between like the work that we do as a network and explaining to people like how our goal of building trust and alignments within the climate movement is really useful. And so one of the things that we experimented with was peer-to-peer fundraising in order to help eventually boost the number of donors and people that are coming into USCAN as a whole. And then trying to identify what things like brought them in.
Awesome.
You know, kind of bridging the gap because we also didn't want to like ask for some of the same donors and stuff as our member organizations.
Right.
We're trying to find that delicate balance of, you know, we still need to fundraise for ourselves, but also like not tripping wires with different environmental groups.
Oh, awesome points. Thanks, guys. So Jessica, I want to swing it back to you to really get into the nitty gritty of the projects. And one of the things I'll say is that this cohort has been fascinating to watch evolve in the difference of the projects, but also just sort of the connective threads between some of the universals in terms of messaging and audience that everybody struggled with and conquered along the way. And those of you that have networks underneath you and really not trying to, Jameer, you put it best, not trying to, you know, trip on other organizations and hurt anybody else's fundraising efforts. So this was, I think, fairly revolutionary to see in the thoughtfulness that went sort of across the cohort. So Jess, can you tell us what Water Collaborative did?
Yes, absolutely. So I kind of alluded to it in my the last question. We offered tours a lot of times for free, but then we realized, well, why don't we monetize it? New Orleans is a #1 destination in the world. We have over 14 million visitors a year, and sometimes upwards of 20 million visitors a year. It's a wedding destination, it's a conference destination. And I realized, I said, one of the things that, you know, connects with our mission is to educate people about the water systems of Louisiana and why New Orleans is specifically so important. You know, a lot of times people see things like Katrina and they think that's the beginning and the end of our story, but that's not even the middle of the story in regards to our climate relationship. And so the project, we created a tour company called Green Tours, where we offer all tourists, conference goers, locals, school groups, etc., different types of tours that talk about the water relationship that New Orleans and Southeast Louisiana has. It covers things as far as the past and all the way to the present. And we have 3 different types of tours. We have a French Quarter walking tour, which is about 2.5 hours. And again, it covers history from how the Mississippi Delta was created, to indigenous history, to the enslaved and the impacts of slavery on steamboats, food systems, and to now the largest and busiest port in the United States in New Orleans, and beyond. We also provide a self-guided biking tour using an app called Voice Maps. And then again, we do custom conference tours that are meant to speak to each audience. And so those tours can run between 2 and we've run upwards of 6-hour tours, which can include volunteer opportunities, tours of some of the larger infrastructure systems like the Bonnet Carré Spillway and the pumping system, as well as green infrastructure sites and neighborhood visits. So we offer a wide variety. And again, that's really to kind of meet the needs of the bustling and growing tourism industry, but also meet that with facts, history, and hopefully leaving some people who are visitors of the city more enlightened around the relationship this area has with its climate.
Thanks, Jess. I will say that Water Collaborative and Jessica's team definitely will always hold a special place in my heart as a fundraiser, because it was the only budget I have ever built that had sippy cups for alcoholic drinks for the French Quarter walking tours in it. So that, you know, definitely a progressive multiplier first for this fundraiser. So the team has been awesome to work with. But just tell us a little bit about what were the big learnings about the challenge of burning independent revenue and really leaning into something you were already doing, and what were the successes and sort of the trajectory look like for you from here?
Yeah, I mean, overall, to Bethany's point, it was a challenge, but it was a fun challenge. And so there was a few hiccups along the way in terms of challenges. One is because the history is so large, trying to compile that information and trying to figure out how to best tell that story was the first challenge, but we did figure that out, and we have a manuscript now for other tour guides to do. The other challenge was really trying to figure out how to make it profitable, I think, because while there are tours all across the city, there's swamp tours, there's ghost tours, there's booze tours. How do you actually make it profitable, especially for something like this? And especially what Bethany was talking about, we have other swag, we have bags, we have boozy cups. How do we, also speak to residents? And that was the middle point, whether it's the script or the cups or in the bags or hats. What actually will pull a resident in to say that, okay, I have a 3-day weekend in New Orleans. Will I want to spend it on this history tour? And so we had to really kind of find a really good marketing and branding strategy, not only in the physical aesthetics, but also in the commentary. And so that was one of the things too, is, or should we include booze? Because one of the things we interviewed a lot of different tour companies, and people often said that if you put booze in the title, even if it's one drink, you suddenly open the door up for a larger swath of tourists. But then on the other side of that, it's like, well, are these the kind of tourists we want? Is it like a bachelorette party that they're going to be screaming and yelling the whole time and not really listening? So we have to really find a balance. And that was really the key, is because it's not a typical fundraising project where it's like, okay, we're going to reach out to our donors, and our donors have the same interests in mind and they understand our mission. These are people who've never engaged with us. And we're hoping that they leave their 2.5 hours with us, or their 6 hours with us, saying, not only did I learn something, but I know something about this organization and I want to stick with them. I want to support them long term. And so that was one of the biggest challenges. But we've really been through all of it, and we've been through the ringer. The good thing I will say is that being in New Orleans specifically is a tourism city, we didn't have a lot of challenges in terms of like permits and logistics and costs in that aspect. The city really is a tourism destination, so they don't require a lot of red tape in order to do something like this, especially ironically for nonprofits. So there are other nonprofits that do tours. And so it was really nice to know that we didn't have to deal with we were expecting and anticipating red tape, but we actually didn't run into any of it. And when the city of New Orleans is actually very open to it, and we've talked to city officials and they think it's a great idea. So that's kind of the larger swath of it. But the biggest challenge is, how do you tell the story in a way that makes people who come here for weddings and conferences, but also bachelorette parties, and they just turned 21 years old. How do you get them to convince them that this work is important? But ironically, I would say our younger 21-year-olds, our Gen Zers actually have been our strongest proponents. And we've done a few variations where we had it open to the public and free, and our younger people are like, wow, I never knew this. I wish there were more tours like this. So yeah, it's been a great, exciting journey.
Wonderful. And Jessica, I don't think Danny could have asked for a better tee up to talk about the work that PowerShift Network has done in their project. So Danny, you want to give us a brief overview and successes, challenges, and the trajectory?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to start off by saying that as a middle millennial, I am always here for the Gen Z shout outs and appreciations. And I'm very, very excited to see the way that this generation is showing up for social justice, and take it very seriously that it's up to all of us to make sure that we are supporting them. They are not our saviors. But with that, PowerShift Network used the funding from Progressive Multiplier Fund to experiment with and launch a Giving Circle program for young folks specifically who have wealth. So looking to folks who could donate starting gifts of $2,000 upwards. We had one successful Giving Circle in February of 2021, I want to say it was, and we raised over $160,000 from 12 participants. And it was really beautiful because, like all of the things that we do, we are here for really deep relationship building and deep political education, and are really excited about using this opportunity to work with young folks with wealth, donors, prospective donors, to really be intentional about offering lessons grounded in climate justice and making it really clear that the work that we're doing isn't about a quick fix band-aid, and that false solutions are not real solutions to the climate crisis, no matter how shiny and new they look. That this work is really about dismantling systems of oppression and bringing folks in along the journey. So building really deep relationships and this helping establish PowerShift Network as a political home for these young folks to be in deep relationship with, be able to get a sense of grounding and sense of purpose in terms of the way that they're showing up and supporting movement organizations, specifically in the climate sphere, but also really, really excitingly offering young folks, these young donors with the opportunity to familiarize themselves with our member organizations, right? And we have lots of hopes and dreams that have been manifesting. There have definitely been supporters that have continued supporting, and we are figuring out how we can move past this Zoom era, which has been so hard for us, who are really focused on deep relational organizing and bringing new folks into the fold, into figuring out how we're building a bigger community of donors who are as much a part of our network as any of our member orgs.
And Danny, what's next for the Giving Circles? Where do you see that fitting into your independent revenue generation and power building strategy?
Yeah, totally. So I don't actually have the exact numbers from the Giving Circles, but I can tell you that our individual donor base has grown by over 700% in the past 2 years, because we've been able to focus on this, right? Like, it was rolling the dice. We didn't know what was going to happen, and the support from Progressive Multiplier Fund really helped us be able to go both feet in. We're having events. We're trying to figure out where we are in this pandemic and if we can have in-person events and Giving Circles, and creating more opportunities to introduce our member organizations that are often run by high schoolers, with funders who can fund like a year of their programming at $10,000 or $15,000 and prevent them from tossing and turning at night and being able to focus on the brilliant ideas that they have.
Awesome. Thanks, Danny. Whitney, let's kick it over to you. I know Kentuckians for the Commonwealth is in a unique position among the groups here. Leadership change after a founding and longtime ED has retired, and just sort of the evolution of organizing in rural, in South. So talk to us about your project and how that fit into the bigger picture, and what the trajectory is.
Yeah, for us, it had a lot to do with, well, I'll just tell you what the basis of our experiment was first. Essentially, our goal was to cultivate our online followers, our digital followers, Facebook followers, Instagram followers, into active members and donors. Because we started looking and we were like, we have a pretty big audience here that we're not engaging with. And at one point in time, they've been engaging with us. So how do we like activate them? And we've kind of dabbled in digital fundraising maybe once before. But this was the first time we've had someone on staff that could kind of focus strictly on this. And then PMF gave us some money to test it out. For us, we leaned really hard into the experimenting. Like, I took that to heart. I think Bethany told me that one day. She's like, you're really running with that one. So we did a lot of experimenting with content, like, how weird can we get it? What are people responding to? And our most successful campaign was a sticker campaign. So we learned people like stuff, which I guess seems, it might seem obvious to people, but we hadn't really tried that in a while. And, you know, we really just wanted to try things we either have never done before, or maybe it's been 20 years since we printed a cool sticker and tried to get folks involved that way. And I guess for the future, what we're looking at is getting our members involved with the stuff part. We're heading into our summer fundraising campaign. So we always have an appeal from our members, but they're also now involved with helping us create some of the perks that we're doing. And we'll eventually take it to digital in a few weeks and see what happens.
Awesome. Thanks, Whitney.
Mhm.
All right. Mark, tell us about CJA's experiment. And I know that CJA was actually the first member of the cohort. So trying to figure out lead generation and how to support fundraising across the network. So tell us a little bit about this journey, where it has left your independent revenue generation efforts, especially with your position, and what's next.
Yeah, so our project, I think we can kind of pinpoint the origin in ways with when I started at CJA a little under 3 years ago. And we were pretty quickly ramping up towards end of year fundraising and all of that. And we were thinking about doing a Giving Tuesday email solicitation. And I pretty quickly was like, it feels kind of weird for us just to be like, hey, give us money when we're trying to like build the climate justice movement here. So I proposed the idea, like, what if our fundraising solicitation was for our members? And so I actually went through and like segmented our email lists and got them by region and had all of our members lifted up, especially our grassroots and like base building groups, lifted up in emails that went out. And then that was really great and really nice and felt awesome. And we realized we had no way to really know if that had been successful, because we just told people to do something and all we could really do was track, like, maybe if someone clicked through to the donate page of a member, and that was all we got, that info. We just didn't have the capacity or the time to really go and coordinate with all of our members to make sure that was happening. And so when Bethany came to us with this idea, we were like, let's try to make something like that happen. And so PMF helped us with 20,000 name list buy from Daily Kos. And the overall goal of that was to bring in these new to list names to the organization, people who had never really engaged with us or worked with us or knew much about our work, and figure out how to kind of onboard them, ultimately to convert them to donors for our members. Fast forward a little bit, and my partner went into labor a little earlier than we expected, and CJA is awesome and gave me 3 months of parental leave, and that all led to this project just totally going off the rails and just not being able to really follow through with all of the work we would have to done with our members in order to have that be like a really successful project. So with the help of Bethany, we kind of shifted gears and pivoted and figured out maybe what we could do is, instead of doing this whole big thing of introducing this new group of people to our 40 plus base building organizations, maybe we keep it in-house and we just do some testing with messaging. Because something that we learned early on with this consultation with Bethany and Progressive Multiplier was that our language that we use externally at CJA is like really, really intense inside baseball. We're very much talking to our members when we put things out publicly. And that leads that this is like a learning for me. I was taking our language and putting it into these like readability online scorecards, and like we were like postdoctoral graduate level language that we're using in like emails just to like a newsletter list. And I was like, yo, that is like way too intense. We gotta like, and Bethany was like, yo, that's way too intense. And so she helped with kind of figuring out like how we could bring the language down to earth a little bit more and a little less of that insider lingo. And we did a side by side where we kind of kept the insider language for one portion of this list, and we did more general language, kind of 101 language with the other portion of the list. We realized that pivot happened a little too late for us to really get good information from this to really see how it fleshed out. We ended up getting donors from both groups, not a huge amount, not enough to supplant the foundations that are currently giving us support. So we had some learning to do there. And I think some of the big takeaways was that number one is the language of how we're talking to folks externally. And then also along those lines, or not along those lines, but just being realistic when we're taking on a new project like this. And I think looking at when we're thinking of independent revenue generation, how can we make sure that is as seamless as possible with what we're currently doing? Because this was a pretty big jump for us where we don't really have a huge focus on our digital fundraising and our online fundraising at this point. So it was going from 0 to 100. And that needed a lot of capacity in order to do it really well. And I think it just taught us those lessons of okay, let's figure out how we could maybe go towards we already have membership dues, so maybe we could just be a little better about collecting those and doing things like that could also be this independent revenue generation. But yeah, so I think those are some of the major kind of lessons we had and takeaways.
Yeah, Mark, I appreciate you sharing and being so candid that, our goal is not, you heard Danny about a 700% growth, and we have those. We also have what we call fail forwards of yep, this did not break even. This did not make boodles and boodles of money, but we know what to do next. We know where we need to lean into. And I think one of the things that I really appreciated in this cohort is that everybody took that to heart, and that experimentation and trying the thing you haven't done was 100% okay. And we had some real wins and some breakthrough learnings. Mark, tell me about where your position is going within the independent revenue generation picture at CJA.
Yeah, I think, so I mentioned, the membership dues, we ended up not collecting them for the last couple of years because of the pandemic and then, all the other factors the last few years. But we also transitioned to being our own 501c3 over the last year and a half. And so shifting into that of figuring out kind of the political orientation within our membership about membership dues, and really just kind of getting a little more strict than we've been in the past, because that'll be some degree of revenue. And then also talking about kind of leaning into what we're already doing. We already have our fundraising team actually is kind of driven by strategy within the organization that we just call Move the Money. And so our goal is actually to help move significant amounts of capital into the movement as a whole and into the organization. So it's kind of a twofold goal that we have there. And I think leaning into that a lot more. We already do a lot of funder organizing and donor organizing and starting to get more into kind of corporate engagement work. And so I think leaning into that and figuring out what, Danny did of giving circles and things like that, where we're already engaging with these populations, but figuring out how we can make it work for itself a little bit more, rather than us having to constantly be doing this stewardship and solicitation work.
Awesome. Thanks, Mark. And I want to call out, Mark brought up leaning into some of the models that Danny has tested with the giving circles. This group has really affected the broader portfolio at Progressive Multiplier and the movement, and been so willing to share their learning. So I don't know if Alabama Forward and Evan and the crew are on the phone, but they're actually taking what Water Collaborative learned around their tours and incorporating that into Shape the Field. Imagine Black is taking what US Can learned and incorporating their new peer-to-peer models in their work. So it's not something that we do a lot of white paper writing around or things like that. We're trying to quantify that multiplier effect of the one-to-one connection between our grantee partners, where we now have some of these experiments are literally changing things so far outside of the field of environmental justice and organizations in different states and part of the movement. So we're really, really proud of that and this group. Jameer, I'm going to kick it to you, and can you bring us home before I hand it over to Kate on, tell us about the experiment, what you learned, the good, the bad, the ugly, and where has it set USCAN's independent revenue generation program up to scale?
Yeah, so again, Jameer with USCAN. So we launched this program called Arm in Arm that was kind of co-founded by some of our member organizations who work together. And the idea was basically to create a sunrise movement for people that are 35 years and older. And so we wanted to make a few different changes with it. Our executive director is really close with Sunrise Movement. And so we had a lot of trainers and stuff come help set up like the story, the structure and strategy for Arm in Arm. But the fundraising was the thing that we were still trying to figure out how to get to work. And so initially we were we had looked at doing a hub model. So like you and 3 friends could come together and commit what we call disruptive humanitarianism. So you could do different like civil disobedience protests and things that didn't necessarily arise to an arrestable level. And so we initially tried it out with the hubs and just having the hubs recruit people in, and that like did not work at all, which I thought was funny. You guys mentioned some of these things like Danny's like 700%. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, how did they get there? So, so the first thing we tried like completely failed. And we talked with Bethany, and she has a background in peer-to-peer. And so what we did is we realized that we needed like critical mass first, just to test out and see like how much money can people raise and like how does this functionally work. And so I think it was actually last week, last year, we took 100 people up to Bemidji, Minnesota for Line 3 for a protest there. It went super well. Like there were articles in the New York Times, there were regional articles. My coworker Sydney took a photo of a helicopter, and it was like in The Intercept, like they used her photo. And so that was the first event where we saw that like peer-to-peer was working in this capacity. And so after that, so that was kind of like our national action. And so after that, we kind of changed some things up, and we did a regional action for Mountain Valley Pipeline. And so we also brought protesters to that event as well. And I think that one had like the most amount like raised per person. So we really knew that like, okay, at a regional level, we can really like knock these events out of the park. So we kind of kept looking at like, how do we keep working to, and the big part of our project was in marrying fundraising and action, because I think that's something that everyone's probably going to see as millennial donors kind of age into like a traditional giving age, is like, how do you have people take action and also donate and feel like it's natural happening throughout the process. So we did a third test in Birmingham, Alabama, where we had a rally and different things like that. And that went well, but one of the things we noticed is that it works much better for events than it does trainings. And so kind of where we are right now is, so there's like 2 things I think that are going to be next steps. So one, the program's been really successful. We were able to bring in 2 times as many donors as we had in a previous year for USCAN, just the sheer number of people. So our thing is we have to figure out how to like structure our development program so that we can like thank everyone properly and make sure we're communicating with them. So it's not like we're necessarily taking a step back. We just realized that we have to kind of change our structure to like fit the new revenue models that are coming. So that being said, there's 2 things that we're really looking at doing. One is running some experiments and stuff to see of those people who gave in the past year via peer-to-peer giving, how many of those will stay with us on for the next year and the next few years, so that we can kind of get a prediction of like how much we'll raise over time. And then the second thing is, as, and I don't mean to speak like generally, but as the climate movement largely shifts from like federal action to like states, we're getting ready to run a campaign against Southern Company in Georgia, Alabama, and Mississippi. And so we're going to be raising money to help pay off utility bills for people that are close to getting their power shut off, for single mothers and also elderly people. And we're looking at a few different other groups and stuff as well. And the last thing is trying to infuse like a story of self and like the public narrative, that type of thing, meshing it more with the organizing so that it feels really natural. So that these events, we kind of throw them, people come, and then they're bringing in their like extra contacts and stuff. And so it kind of builds over time.
Awesome. Jamia, thanks so much. And similar to PowerShift, USCAN will always have a place in my fundraiser heart for having to learn what the term arrestability meant and incorporate it into fundraising plans. So I appreciate how much this cohort has stretched us. Kate, I would love to have you sort of take over the moderating duties and talk about sort of the next chapter for these 5 groups. And I should also mention we have 5 groups who are currently in program. We'll be doing a similar webinar with them when they are ready to graduate. But I'd love to talk about this group and what it means for the class we're about to recruit.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Bethany. So yes, you all are the first graduating cohort from Progressive Multipliers EJ program. And as such, you're going to be the first to pilot the peer mentor participatory grant making phase of or model. Northlight has funded stipends for each group, and Progressive Multiplier will be providing continuing strategic assistance on revenue generation for you. And in turn, you're going to be advising on what groups and experiments you think should be included in the incoming cohort. And then you'll serve as peer mentors to that cohort. So I guess we'll stick with the same order. Bethany, I'm looking at you, but Jessica, I'll turn to you first. Please share with us what difference you think this will make to groups, this approach.
Yes, this approach, can you guys hear me just fine?
Yeah.
Perfect. This approach has been a game changer for us personally. One of the things that I should also back up, I started this work when I was
Jessica,
Hey,
sorry
Jessica, your
your
sound just got really funky on us.
it got a little distant sounding.
Well,
Can you guys hear me now?
no.
We hear you, but it still sounds like it's coming through a pipe or something.
We can kick to somebody else. Will you tech troubleshoot, Jess? That's not a problem.
Just try saying one more thing quickly for us, Jessica, and then we'll.
Yes, how about now?
No, it's still like that.
Okay. All right.
Danny, why don't I kick to you, and Jess, why don't you see if you can get that sorted out on your end? I know you're challenged by having to be on your phone.
It's never a Zoom webinar if there's not a tech hiccup. Just like, yeah. So this has made the event real. Anyway, I think that I'm really excited about democratizing fundraising. I think that so many of the struggles that folks in movement world, in the climate justice world are facing are really about how opaque fundraising things are. And people have this idea of what an expert looks like, and people never really feel equipped to be sitting in that expertise role because of, imposter syndrome and just like the opaque nature of philanthropy. I'm really excited about breaking down some of those silos and ideas that there's just like a particular one set of expertise and professionals look a particular kind of way, and working together to democratize and share knowledge in ways that really have a lot of power to change the landscape for folks doing this work.
That's great. Thank you. Jessica, I see you've come back on. You wanna try again?
Yes, can you guys hear me better?
Yeah, you sound great.
Great. All right. So to the question, it's been a game changer for us, particularly because we are, as I mentioned, we're rooted in the Deep South. And one of the things that we struggle with is fundraising around environmental justice issues in New Orleans and Louisiana. You would think we wouldn't have that problem. But because we are in a deep red state, there are a lack of funders, especially wealthy donors. Being from such a poor state, our region just doesn't have a lot of donors that we can go to on a regular basis, and especially in terms of water justice. And so we had to kind of get creative with our fundraising. And then the other thing too is we're a member-based organization. So we had to be careful. Our job is to uplift the water management and water justice sectors here. And so we didn't want to tap into what our other our other members are doing, but also tap into the same people because it could get exhausted for the same funders to keep funding the same people. So when Bethany came to me, it was a game changer for us because we were able to open up the ability for us to fundraise in a way that's not going to take money out of any of our members' pocketbooks, but also we don't have to be dependent on trying to constantly search for donors that we've struggled with for such a long time. And so for the new cohort coming in, I think it's something that when I tell my colleagues about it, other directors especially working in the Deep South, they're amazed by it because one, I appreciate Progressive Multiplier because you all believe in our idea, despite it being very different than most other fundraising concepts. But the other thing is that it allowed us to open up our ability to reach people in new and different ways and people that could potentially be long-term donors in the future. And so being that has been accessible to us, I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing other organizations in similar positions being able to shift the way they fundraise and do something that may be a little bit out of the box, but something that fits the needs of their organization, but also any of their regional challenges that they may be facing.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Jessica. Whitney, how about you?
Yeah, I think I'd have to plus one a lot of what Danny said about the sharing knowledge. For someone who works in more digital things, like it's so crucial. I feel like in movement work to make sure we're all like up to date. We know the best, we know how to run Facebook, unfortunately. And it's an ever-changing beast and like we need it. But also I think it's like groups like this, it's an opportunity to also bounce off ideas of alternatives that will hopefully align more with our visions sooner too.
Yeah, I like that. So it's two-way. You're going to be bringing what you learned as you're mentoring the new groups, but also benefiting from the creativity that's going to come in as more and more groups are able to participate. Mark, how about you? What are your thoughts on this model?
Yeah, I think kind of following off of what Whitney said, just that like we don't need to keep reinventing the wheel and coming together in spaces like this is a way to not have our organizations constantly feeling like we're starting from scratch and learning from each other, teaching each other, and just really coming together in the type of community we say we're building and we are trying to build. And I think on top of that too is also breaking down this idea of everything being a zero-sum game. I know that can be like a really hard thing for us to challenge. Like for me internally, it's hard enough. So then when we scale that out to organizations and communities and states and et cetera, it gets even harder. But I think doing things like this in community with each other and building these relationships as individuals, as organizations, is a way to remember that there is an abundant amount of capital out there in the world, just needing to be tapped into in the appropriate ways in order for us to really be moving the amount of money that needs to move to make the wins happen that we need. And the more we can be coming together, the more we can break down those barriers that we have built up either intentionally or unintentionally to working together.
I love that. That's great. And Jameer, last but definitely not least, please share your thoughts with us.
Yeah, so I think one of the biggest benefits about like the way that this process has worked is so like Bethany mentioned that like we've already worked with Imagine Black to like help stop them from making mistakes that we made, just like general things. It's like, oh, don't do this. Like you're gonna need this thing and this thing and this thing. And Trevor sent me an email and said that he was super excited about the stuff that I sent him. We also worked with, I think Green Faith was doing a project and we like helped them out a little bit with some things that they needed. So one, I think just stopping like the really like bad things maybe we were thinking or like those ideas and stuff that we had. But I do think that like as the years go on, like you'll see that like that'll accumulate over time, so that overall people will have more expertise to say like, oh, you could do this with this program. And I think the other thing is just help with expectations. Like when we first started doing our experiments and stuff, we didn't really know, like we didn't know what the average donation was going to be. So like we couldn't plan how much we were going to raise. But like, fortunately, like we found out like we came in above the national average, which was really good. So like even just pegging that so people know like how much should we expect people to donate to peer-to-peer pages and stuff. And one of this is like a weird example, but I think it illustrates the point, is that like as we've gone on through like working the peer-to-peer experiments and stuff, I say that the way that we raise money is a little bit smoother. So it's not, as when we first started, it was very herky-jerky, right? Like there'd be like $1,000 raised this day, $200 raised one day, $50 raised the next day. But as we've gotten better, you can genuinely see it in our charts, like the fundraising kind of ramps up smoothly. So it's like the smoothing out of the processes and like what factors are big considerations and thinking through those that have really helped, again, like smooth out the fundraising process. So we can know what to expect. Like our executive director knows how much money is coming in roughly, like we're getting better at the projections and things like that. So I think that's one of the big benefits, is just like all of the knowledge in the room to help prevent the bad mistakes and then helping make things more efficient over time.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I'll just editorialize for a second that because I have the privilege of participating in a participatory grant making effort. And one of the things I didn't fully anticipate is even though I'm currently sitting in a funder role, and so I see the advantage of that is getting to see kind of this broad landscape of all the work that's out there. You see even more when you're doing kind of this participatory grant making, like it. So the ability to just kind of learn about other groups and that weren't on your radar is another cool aspect, I think, of that approach. Okay, so the last question that I'm gonna ask of each of you before we open it up is, funders, listen up. What support from philanthropy do you think the EJ movement needs to scale to meet the demands on it to restore the environment and realize justice? And Jessica, I'll let you go first on that.
Yes, it's so funny you asked this question because I just came from a conference in DC and where we spent 2 days talking about this one thing. And so I think kind of honing in on the work that I've done with Progressive Multiplier, but also the conversations I've had over the past 2 days, is really thinking about, you know, getting direct funds to organizations in a way that reduces red tape, but increases transparency, trust, and understanding and collaboration. We oftentimes, we've had different funders, and sometimes it's really project heavy, which is great if depending on what the project is and it makes sense. But a lot of times, one of the things that we struggle with is it takes way more time to do and execute a lot of the projects that we do. You know, we're doing a water testing project down the Mississippi River, and we didn't realize how much human capital it requires to organize, to get interns, to get fellows, to get testing kits, to find, you know, all kinds of materials, but also to teach everyone what they need to be taught. And so oftentimes I would say to other funders, and I would say now, is if we can find a way to continually support human capital operations, but also allow these organizations to be creative and not hamstring them at their feet or their hands, and trying to also shape what environmental justice looks like. I think there's a lot of ideas on what environmental justice looks like. There's a lot of beliefs about, well, environmental justice looks like this and not that. We have always struggled with that because when we say water, people always say, oh, water is a human right, but our organization gets into the weeds about that. What are the policies that make it a human right? What does affordability look like? What does sewerage waste treatment look like? That's not a sexy topic, but that's how you get to water as a human right. And so making sure that you're open-minded about these concepts, and whether that's the fundraising models as well as the project models, but also being open to the different types of missions that exist, because every community, every neighborhood, every region, every state is different and their needs are different. And so being respectful of those boundaries, but also supportive, is a really important collaborative effort that requires lots of listening and less talking.
Great, very great articulation of why general operating support is so important. Danny.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, it's about figuring out how to break away from a scarcity mindset, right? Because Funders are really looking to get the most bang for their buck, but the fact of the matter is working around scarcity, the amount of burnout that we're dealing with in the movement, the lack of access to rest and like repair as whole humans means that is a huge part of why we're losing, to my mind, period, right? Like the amount of exhaustion, the amount of the amount of doubt that I get when I tell people that we have a four-day work week at Power Shift Network is really worrisome, because if we are not our whole full human selves, we're not going to be able to do this work well. And also we need folks who are most impacted to be at the front of these organizations, which also means that we are not benefiting from things like generational wealth or the safety nets that a lot of other folks who come from class privilege primarily, but also other sorts of social privileges are able to access. I really deeply think that we need to really invest in community care as a movement, and there are lots of really powerful opportunities that funders could be exploring to make that happen. Sabbaticals, I'm in my transition on my way to sabbatical right now. My hard start date is July 1st, and I'm going to be offline for a little over 2.5 months. And I'm really excited about this, but I think really treating people like whole people and figuring out what we need to be able to show up as our best selves is really important, and that we've really struggled and suffered a lot from funders trying to figure out how they can get the most impact with the fewest dollars, because it's really harmed movement culture as a whole. I also want to talk for days about funding youth leaders very specifically, because there are so many barriers to access, and funding young people is a really, really important way to facilitate a really powerful cultural shift in our movement work. I'm just going to invite folks to reach out to me, and I'll get back to you in the fall, but basically handing over control and like democratic grant making processes and making sure that infrastructure exists there is really what it looks like.
Yeah, that's great. I wasn't gonna out you, but you are sort of making an exception to your sabbatical to do this. And yeah, I'm so glad you're with us today, but I'm so glad you're going off on sabbatical and not going to do this for a little while.
Hard lines. I'm locking myself out of email after this, actually.
Good. Whitney.
Yeah, so I think for us at KFDC, it's kind of similar what Jessica was saying. We really need funders to recognize and fund creative levers for change. In Kentucky, the political landscape is just, we're living with a Republican super duper majority. So like, we don't have a lot of room to make impact on policy in our General Assembly down in Frankfurt. What we do, and what we have seen, is that we can make some major breakthroughs at public service commissions. But what that takes is tons of organizing, sometimes in rural areas, sometimes in urban areas. And it takes a lot of folks, it takes a lot of time for folks to go and testify, things like that. I think is what our organization would really benefit from.
Yeah, thanks. Mark.
Yeah, thanks for this question. I think the first thing is to just remember and ground ourselves that the demand to restore the environment and realize justice isn't just something for the environmental justice movement to be doing. That's what we all need to be doing as good ancestors to future generations. Hard stop. Beyond that, when we're talking about funders and the way foundations move in the world, I think there's kind of two main considerations. The first is the way your grants move. And we see a lot more money moving to good work right now, which is amazing. So we don't need more focus groups. We don't need more meetings to know that grassroots, frontline, democratically controlled and led solutions are the solution to the climate crisis. That has been determined. We know that to be a fact right now. That is what is reducing carbon emissions. That is what is stopping injustice. That is what is restoring the environment and ecosystems. So we need money going there in an unrestricted way that's multi-years, so people know it's coming over multiple years with little to no reporting. On top of that, what we also see is this talk about we need kind of an all of the above approach to kind of saving the world, which leads to a lot of funders giving money to things like carbon sequestration and storage, figuring out how to make carbon markets work, figuring out how to lace the ice on Antarctica with little plastic pebbles to try and stop sunlight from being absorbed and reflecting it in the atmosphere. That's not helping. That's not helping anybody. And in fact, it's actually perpetuating the harm that environmental justice communities continue to fight. And so you cannot actually in good faith say that you are supporting the environmental justice movement if your money is also moving to that. Third thing, or second thing, I lost count, your investments, y'all. Private foundations in the United States hold at least $1 trillion in assets. And I can guarantee 99.999% of that sits in the stock market. And as long as you have money sitting in the extractive stock market, it is harming frontline communities today. So unless you are actually auditing where your investments are going, when they're not going out as that 5% rule requires you to give away, you have 95% of the capital you have control of that is harming people, and it is harming communities, and it is perpetuating this climate crisis. So we need to be figuring out how to move that out of the stock market and into democratically controlled community-led solutions that are building regenerative economic models that recycle that capital in communities so communities can be building abundance and building these things like KFTC has already figured out with community solar. And a lot of places have figured out. Places are doing it. Communities are already doing it. They're leading it. We know it and it's there. And we just need to be open to it and actually figure out how to move the money there. And so those are like the main things. And then once y'all are actively doing that, call out your peers, work with other funders, change their priorities, affect change with them. Because in the same way that, you know, racism makes it hard for white folks to fully hear what I have to say as a person of color, it can be really hard for funders to like truly change unless they're getting called out by their peers and the other funders out there. So it's a lot of work, but that's what we do. That's what the movement does, right? And like CJA, we do this work with our funders, we do it with donors, we do it with all kinds of folks, and we're here to support that process as well. It's a two-way street, but there's a lot of answers that are already out there, and let's just do it. And that's where we're at. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I'm in a number of spaces with CJA to collaborate around doing that kind of stuff. And to take you up on your suggestion, I will say we have moved to 100% mission aligned investing, and I make myself available to any funders on this call who'd like to talk about how we took a very skeptical board on that journey and got there. So, Jameer, I'm going to give you the final word on this one. What should funders do?
So, am I allowed to share a link in the chat? So, I'm not sure if y'all can see that, but so at USCAN, we view JEDI environmental justice as an overlay for everything that we do. So like a few years ago, we created like a shared policy platform that like dozens and dozens of organizations signed on. And one thing that we do at an individual level within our committees as an organization and just like throughout our work is we use this thing called a JEDI checklist. And so our action teams, like 2 times a year, we're getting ready to revise this process at our annual meeting, which is why I'm in this weird hotel room. But so we make our action teams go through this at least once a year. I think it's twice a year. And we've actually like a real world example. A few years ago, we were working on a climate policy platform. And we realized on one of our calls that we didn't have any indigenous leaders or labor groups helping input into the policy process. And I kid you not, the whole argument that was happening back in December around Build Back Better with whether or not electric vehicles would get rebates, like was related to this, like us bringing like groups in to talk about this. So I just wanted to flag that as like, this helps me as a person, like individually, it helps us as an organization, just as like are we doing the right thing? Are we considering people who aren't here? Like, what can we do to incorporate more people? And so it works really well for us. And we share this on our website. You can download a template of it. People have like, government agencies have asked us for it, that type thing. So I always share that as a resource. But just to say also that like, you just can't, like, we pay for leaders of color's time if they're speaking on panels, things like that, to make sure that they can get to those events, because we know how hard people have to work to make it to things like that. And the second point that I would say, transitioning away from the JEDI checklist, is that like, I come from a political background, so I always think of campaigns through, I worked for Senator Barbara Mikulski for a while, so I always think of money, organization, and message as like, no matter what you're doing, like you're probably going to be touching one of those three things. And one of our funders actually gave us a grant, which ended up leading us to Progressive Multiplier Fund to help stabilize our funding. So just recognizing like, okay, we have a bunch of groups, they're doing great work, but like maybe their funding is up and down. Like, how do we stabilize the money part of the organization, or the organizing part, or the messaging part? So figuring out like how you can strengthen those so that it's like consistent over time and also scalable. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for sharing that tool. I'm going to share it with my team. Bethany, back to you, I think.
Now we are almost at the bottom of the hour and the end of our time together. I want to open up the floor via chat. If everybody who has questions would like to ask directly of our panelists or our funder partners here, would love the questions. I hate the Zoom webinar format that we can't just have big discussions. For those of you who are on trainings with us all the time, you know, we like to keep it casual and keep it conversational, but we'll have to deal with just chat right now. And certainly Anastasia and Kate, if you have questions of our panelists that we didn't cover, you are welcome, of course, to weigh in as well, or panelists of each other. Questions? I have no plants in the audience, so we definitely need folks to have questions. All right, Rachel, thank you. What was the most difficult aspect of doing the work to diversify revenue? I know everybody on this call has that one. Any volunteers of our 5 grantee partners? Of what has been the hardest part to diversify into a new stream?
I'll just jump in real quick. I think just the team buy-in. Yeah. Really simply, I think and I think understanding upfront how much capacity it's going to take to really be able to project what that team buy-in needs to be. It's kind of like you're building it as you're writing it kind of situation. So that can be kind of hard to figure out. And I think just like figuring out how to do the managing up that's necessary, whether that's from you to a director or director to a board of directors, whatever that needs to be, can be a bit of work that is on top of just whatever this new project is. But I think that's a bit of work there.
I would agree with what Mark said. Particularly, I think the part you said about, we joke about building the plane and flying at the same time. I think that one of the hardest things has been explaining, like, I think particularly as a fundraiser, I think like in a, not necessarily a longer term, but in a longer term, a different way about money and how it works within the organization. And so sometimes there were things that would come up that would be kind of hard to explain, like why this thing really matters, like a year out from when I think like the EDs and stuff think that that decision would be made. So there are a lot of really small things where it's like, well, I need to know about this, because if not, it's going to be a huge change in 6 months versus a smaller change. So a lot of things like that, I think, were pretty hard to make decisions on.
A couple other questions that we're seeing in the chat from Sarah, talking about, coming from a small organization, and considering how to diversify revenue streams and trying to avoid running another business or digging into a lot of human capital. Did you guys hire to launch these? How did you navigate launching something and doing your day jobs at the same time?
I can jump in.
Go ahead, Jessica.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think I'm just going to echo what everybody said, building the plane and flying it at the same time. We had to, as much as it's a fun concept, it was a lot of work on the front end and the back end. And so, Bethany knows we had, our first person left us, and we had a second person that moved on, and we've been through 3 different people to staff this project. And in between, I've been managing it along with my comms coordinator. And so we have always just we've always had to make time for it, even if we didn't necessarily have the time for it. And I'd also say that the biggest challenge too, in terms of time management, is that, we're in Louisiana, and so we have to keep dealing with hurricanes and recovery. And every time a hurricane hits, you basically lose a month of work. And so our project got pushed back for that reason. And so we are now finally at the last stage, yay. And we are about to hire someone full-time to run the program. But it took so long because you do need someone dedicated to that project who understands that project. And every time we lost someone, you lose a little bit of intellectual property with it. So we'd have to kind of keep starting over again.
Yeah, and Jessica, I'll echo that in terms of, Kate asked you all what did you want philanthropy to know about what EJ groups needed to scale. And I think that across our entire cohort, outside of both EJ and our broader environmental work, is that these groups are projects that get added to someone's plate. They take a lot of time and dedication, and until we can get to the point where either they have become self-funding and can hire, or we run into the rare institutional funder who will fund a position while this program is launching, it is hard. And that's one of the things at Progressive Multiplier, where we provide as much strategic assistance as we can, but we are not internal staff members. And we definitely need to figure a way out in the funding community to how to properly fund staff until it becomes self-sustaining within revenue generation. I think we probably have time for another question, and we've had a few. For those of you who've asked questions and we don't get to them, we will definitely email you with answers. We have a question: have you had any success fundraising around initiatives that aren't necessarily direct service, like operations and content creation? I would say in our broader portfolio, absolutely. Most of the groups we deal with are not direct service organizations, and they are systemic change organizations. And we are, the fundraising act is usually not a direct to donor ask. They're monetizing something they're already doing. Like Jessica said, we have civic engagement groups that have monetized their trainings, or we've had groups that have done those sort of alternative models when they can't make a direct service pitch, but we certainly have a lot of donor member models as well in the non-direct service space. Guys, any thoughts there on success around initiatives that aren't direct service? I know, Whitney, the fundraising you guys have done has not really touched on service.
No, and a lot of stuff we did with PMF was the last half was based off of a huge climate canvas we did in the fall of 21. And it was that was kind of a fill forward, and we're about to launch that last part of it. And I'm hoping maybe we'll see a little bit. But as far, it was really great content. Contracted Eastern Kentucky and to be a videographer for us. But it just didn't hit the right spot.
Yeah, so that it is a constant challenge. So for those folks who do not have a direct service line in their messaging, definitely really consider what that means for launching a direct to donor program. Lots of other ways to earn revenue that is independent. So in terms of all the learnings for these groups, we are relaunching Progressive Multiplier's website, and all of the, we will have all of these learnings as well as from the other 80 or so grantee partners that we're working with all of their experiment results. We are hoping to do trainings for the broader networks that live within these groups in the EJ cohort as our class 2 graduates. And that brings us to class 3, which will get to work with these amazing groups on the phone. So thank you to JPB and Northlight. We are going to be running this program for several more years, so we're really excited about that. Polly, if you could put the link to the LOI form in the chat for me, and we will send it around an email to everyone. So if you are an environmental justice group working on systemic change and you want to start experimenting with revenue generation, we would absolutely love to hear from you and get to see our participatory grant making process firsthand here. So thank you all so much for coming and for being part of this discussion. To our funders, this has just been an amazing journey and we appreciate the partnership so much. And to these 5 groups, you have been amazing partners and made me grow so much as a fundraiser, as a person, and as an ally in the movement. So thank you for your continued being in relationship with Progressive Multiplier.